Have you ever wondered how something can become an overnight sensation? Or how an idea or product becomes extremely popular in a short period of time? In Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, he talks about how these epidemics of change start, spread, and hold their momentum. The word epidemic is part of the way he shows how quickly something can take hold and become a massive success. He also shows how the same principles are used to spread negative behaviors and ideas as well. In all of his examples, something seemingly small becomes the tipping point. This tipping point is the point where it all suddenly goes very well or very bad. Gladwell uses research about epidemics and success stories to show how the 3 rules of tipping points have created such astounding events, both in the world of life and business, personal and professional. The law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context are all places where having the right component at the right time can lead to a tipping point. He shows how everything from a syphilis epidemic to the success of Sesame Street to the ride of Paul Revere were examples of using one or more of these rules to create powerful and almost immediate results. Here's what you'll learn about in this book summary. The law of the few. How a few key people are known as connectors, mavens, and salesmen can compel people to engage in something new. The stickiness factor. Ways of giving a message that ensure that it stays with the recipient and makes the desired impact. The power of context. Understanding how powerful of an impact our environment has on us and those around us, and how to use this to create a tipping point. Crucial quotes. The world of the tipping point is a place where the unexpected becomes expected, where radical change is more than possibility. It is, contrary to all our expectations, a certainty. Quote, what mavens and connectors and salesmen do to an idea in order to make it contagious is to alter it in such a way that extraneous details are dropped and others are exaggerated so that the message itself comes to acquire a deeper meaning. Quote, in the end, tipping points are a reaffirmation of the potential for change and the power of intelligent action. Tweetable summary. Exponential success is sequential, not simultaneous. Big success depends upon small strategic steps. Big idea number 1. We can make our concept, product, or business an epidemic. Quote, ideas and products and messages and behaviors spread just like viruses do. Gladwell begins the tipping point with the story of Hush Puppy Shoes' transformation from a fading brand to a fashion sensation, all because some kids in Manhattan chose to be different and start wearing Hush Puppies. Although they weren't intentionally starting something, the look took off, and in a span of 2 years, Hush Puppies went from 30,000 pairs sold a year to 430,000 pairs sold a year. The following year, this has-been brand won the prize for best accessory from fashion designers. The power of a few people wearing a shoe turned around an entire company. A tipping point has a few key characteristics. The behavior is contagious, little changes lead to big impacts, and both happen in a hurry. Many people think that huge actions are required to create an epidemic, and this just isn't the case. Gladwell shows many examples where small changes led to huge epidemics. In fact, His examples are necessary to show how great an impact small changes can actually have. It tends to go against our assumptions, and this concept creates an inspiring prospect that the right small changes can actually lead to a tipping point in our favor. Big idea number 2, the law of the few. Quote, people pass on all kinds of information to each other all the time, but it's only in the rare instance that such an exchange ignites a word-of-mouth epidemic. Paul Revere is famous for his midnight ride that alerted everyone to the north and west of Boston that the British were coming. His information was critical to the success of the colonial militia. He created a word-of-mouth epidemic. But not many people have heard of the other guy. William Dawes also set out on that night to the towns west of Boston. He had the same message to give, but his message didn't create the same epidemic. This demonstrates the law of the few. Some people can spread the message with great success. Others simply cannot. In his law of the few, Gladwell identifies 3 types of people who can create this type of epidemic. These people, whether working in concert together or individually, bring about tipping points. They are connectors, mavens, and salesmen. Big idea number 3. Connectors are important to all of us and can be the key to creating an epidemic. Quote, these people who introduce us to our social circles, these people on whom we rely more heavily than we realize, are connectors, people with a special gift for bringing the world together. A connector is someone who knows a lot of people and who can recall the right people for the right situation. They are the ones who introduce us to the people who become important in our lives. They come from all walks of life and have a knack of sorts for remembering names and details and even addresses from people they've met over their entire life. A connector might be the one who introduces a writer to an agent, or an entrepreneur to an investor, or a parent to a nanny service. They don't track people for any personal gain or anything. They just really like people. And they are very, very good at connecting people they know to one another. They're the stranger that you actually enjoy talking to on a plane or flight, or the person your mom tells you to phone who's actually helpful and happy to help. Connectors always like meeting new people and are happy to make the effort to keep in touch with these people that they meet. They not only know people from all walks of life, but they are active in connecting with these different types of people as well. And that's how they can be critical in creating a tipping point. In Gladwell's words, we rely on them, that is, connectors, to give us access to opportunities and worlds to which we don't belong. A connector decided that hush puppies were cool, and everyone else followed suit. Paul Revere was a connector. He knew who to talk to and where they lived, but he also knew how to engage everyone he met with his message. And then he emboldened them to keep spreading the message that the British were coming. Big idea number 4. Mavens are experts in information and passionately share their expertise. Quote, mavens have the knowledge and the social skills to start word-of-mouth epidemics. The fact that mavens want to help for no other reason than because they like to help turns out to be an awfully effective way of getting someone's attention. A maven will know a great deal about certain things. The maven, first of all, gains knowledge for their own use. Whether it's cars, electronics, or bargain shopping, they do their research and retain information. What sets a maven apart from the average consumer is that they want to help others with the information they've gained. They're happy to give great advice, but they don't give advice to sell. They give advice because they want to, because it's helpful. When a maven recommends a hotel or restaurant, you know you'll want to go there because they only recommend what will be helpful for you, because they want to recommend it. They'll also present their information in such a compelling way that you're convinced to go and buy or go or do whatever it is that they suggest. Big idea number 5. Salesmen are the ultimate persuaders. Quote, "But there is also a select group of people, salesmen, with the skills to persuade us when we are unconvinced of what we are hearing. And they are as critical to the tipping point word of mouth epidemics as the other two groups, connectors and mavens." Unquote. Salesmen are able to use their eyes, their body language, their facial expressions, and their words to convince us to buy whatever it is that they're selling. Gladwell has compiled fascinating examples of how the physical presentation of a message is what convinces us. Persuasion is much more than using a great argument. Salesmen use these techniques to connect their message with the listener. They have an ability to share their emotions and beliefs in a way that is engaging and believable. Big idea number 6. The stickiness factor, making the message stick. Quote, "They discovered that by making small but critical adjustments in how they presented ideas to preschoolers, they could overcome television's weakness as a teaching tool and make what they had to say memorable. Sesame Street succeeded because it learned how to make television sticky." Unquote. The law of the few is about how the right messenger can start an epidemic. The stickiness factor is about the message itself. Some messages are easy to spread, like the British are coming. Other messages might not be so immediately engaging. When a message is sticky enough, so memorable that it gets repeated over and over and over and gets repeatedly shared, it can lead to a tipping point. But it turns out that making a message sticky can be quite challenging. Gladwell talks about an experiment that was run at Yale University in the 1960s to see how using fear as a motivator could actually compel students to get a tetanus shot. Turns out that fear, while successful in getting students' initial attention, wasn't enough to motivate them to get the actual tetanus shot. What worked was informing students where to get the shot and when the health center was actually open. Knowing when they could get their tetanus shot was the difference in stickiness between the two messages. It made the advice applicable to them and something they could use in their real lives. Sesame Street's success is another example of stickiness. We all know that Sesame Street's been very successful in educating preschoolers. It offers a very sticky message. The research into how to make that message sticky was critical to its success. They learned that preschoolers will pay more attention when puppets and people are in the same scenes. That they pay more attention when they understand what they are watching. That they don't like confusing scenes, and that segments should be about 3 minutes long. All of these were very different from what producers initially thought about what kept people's attention, and especially, in this case, the children's attention. Sesame Street has successfully taught so many children because the producers learned how to make shows that would stick with preschoolers. The stickiness factor teaches us that creating the message in the right way will lead to action and to a tipping point. Big idea number 7. The power of context in our environment to create a tipping point. Quote, "The power of context is based on the premise that an epidemic can be reversed, can be tipped, by tinkering with the smallest details of the immediate environment." Unquote. The tipping points show that the context of a message is far more important than we might think. It's likely that Paul Revere's midnight ride was far more effective than an afternoon ride. People were at home and they were accessible, and the message would seem far more dramatic at nighttime. Crime is another example of how context can impact an epidemic. We all know that an abandoned house will attract more vandalism than a brightly lit occupied home. The tipping point to a crime epidemic is the environment. Graffiti that's not cleaned up can invite a wave of graffiti and other crime. In the late 1980s, crime had become an epidemic in the New York subways. The first step to averting the epidemic, creating a tipping point away from crime, was to clean up all the graffiti. The environment was changed in one way. After this, they tackled fare beating, the practice of skipping out on paying for the subway ride. Again, it would be hard to see how stopping people from paying $1.25 per fare would make an epidemic-sized impact. However, the arrest of all fare beaters led to criminals with outstanding warrants being arrested, finding 1 out of 20 carrying some sort of weapon and arrests for all sorts of little misdemeanors. The result of these actions was a significant reduction in crime. The power of context says that someone's actions can be caused by the small characteristics of the environment they're in. It's not a clear, big picture idea, but rather it says that the little things surrounding someone are what really matter. By extension, changing these little things can have a big impact on behavior. It says that how we are feeling on the inside can be caused by what is physically around us. Behaviors can be caused by what we wear and what others around us wear. A person in prison garb will feel and act differently than a person in a business suit, regardless of whether that person is really a criminal or a successful business person. Even the seemingly inherent trait of honesty can be impacted by environment and situation. This is why understanding the power of context is so incredibly important. The right person giving the right message in the wrong place may not create an epidemic simply because the environment, that is, the context, did not allow the desired action. Big idea number 8, the power of context. Who we are with to create a tipping point. Quote, "Once we're in a group, we're all susceptible to peer pressure and social norms and any number of other kinds of influence that can play a critical role in sweeping us up in the beginnings of an epidemic." Unquote. Being in the right group can start a tipping point. The right group has a few key aspects. One of the most interesting is something called the Rule of 150. A group of 150 people or less can maintain significant relationships and function optimally. Anything more than that, and things don't go so well. The Hutterites, groups of simple living families who share the same faith, have discovered this idea and will divide into 2 groups when their numbers reach 150. Some companies have also found enormous success in keeping entire teams under 150 employees. It seems like an insignificant detail, but it is an example of how the power of context can start an epidemic. Increasing a group to over 150 can also create a tipping point, one where things stop working and success is lost because people act differently when the size of the group increases over 150 people. Closing notes. The key takeaway from this book: a tipping point, an epidemic of success, can occur when small, meaningful changes are used in a conscious way. Actionable insights from the tipping point. Pay attention to the people around you. Use your connectors, your mavens, and your salesmen to spread your message quickly to the right people. Make your message stick. Make it meaningful to the lives of the people who are receiving it. Use the power of context to your advantage. Create an environment that encourages the actions that you want. When your success reaches 150 people, divide and continue to conquer. Remember that small changes can create epidemics.